Some serious draft information just hit the wire, and Cowboys Nation needs to know what's going on before draft night gets here because things are shifting fast, and Dallas has their eyes on some names that are sliding down boards for very specific reasons. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button right now because we're covering every single Cowboys draft update the second it drops, and we're getting way too few subscribers for the amount of breaking news we're bringing you. So do me a solid and subscribe to Blue and Silver Nation so you don't miss a thing. Alright, let's get right into this, because what's happening with these prospects could completely change how the Cowboys approach picks 12 and 20 and maybe even a trade scenario. So you're going to want to hear all of this before you form your opinions on draft day. First guy we need to talk about is Avon Terrell, and there's some drama surrounding his 40 time that's making teams rethink where he belongs in this draft. Initially, the story was that Terrell pulled his hamstring on his first run at his pro day, so there was no official time posted, and everyone kind of assumed it was a precautionary thing and he'd be fine. But here's where it gets interesting. It turns out he actually did run the 40 twice. Once at 4.69 and then again at 4.64. And that second time is what's now being circulated by his camp as the official number. So you have to ask yourself, why did they let everyone believe he didn't run at all if he actually posted a 4.64? The answer might be that 4.64 is slow for an outside cornerback in today's NFL, and they were hoping to control the narrative a little bit. Corner is a stopwatch position, and if you can't run with receivers down the field, you become a liability that forces the defense to always give you help over the top. And that's a problem because offenses will just attack you vertically all game long, and there's nothing you can do about it. One draft analyst who's highly respected around the league dropped Terrell from 18th overall to 27th on his big board, and that's a significant fall that tells you the speed concern is real. If that 4.64 time is legitimate and there was no actual hamstring injury slowing him down, then teams have to seriously reconsider whether he can play on the outside or if he's limited to slot work. Now here's the twist. The Cowboys have a top 30 visit scheduled with Avon Terrell, and the fit for Dallas might actually still make sense even with the speed questions. If you're looking at Terrell as a nickel corner who plays with physicality, offers run support, and has a knack for forcing fumbles, then maybe the straight line speed isn't as big of a deal because he's not being asked to run stride for stride with Tyreek Hill on the boundary. He profiles as a tough, smart, physical slot defender, and depending on what happens at 12, Dallas could absolutely look at him at 20, or in a trade-back scenario where they add extra picks and still grab a starting caliber nickel. The real question is whether his tape shows enough quickness and short area burst to survive inside. Because if he's slow in a straight line and doesn't have twitch in tight spaces, then you're just drafting a guy who can't cover anybody anywhere, and that's a disaster waiting to happen. But here's what nobody's talking about. If Terrell really did pull a hamstring and that 4.64 was run injured, then all of this panic is overblown, and he's still a legit first-round talent who brings everything you want in a modern corner except elite speed. The Cowboys have to decide if they believe the injury story or if they think this is who he is as an athlete, and that's where the medical records and the private workouts and the interviews all come into play. Would you take a chance on Terrell at 20 if he's sitting there and you believe he can be a day one starter in the slot? Let me know in the comments because this is one of those picks that could go either way, and Cowboys fans are going to have strong opinions on it. The bottom line is this: corner is a need for Dallas, and Terrell has the film to justify a first-round grade, but if the speed is real and he can't run, you're potentially wasting a premium pick on a player who gets exposed every time he's matched up one-on-one, and that's not a risk you can afford to take when you're trying to build a championship defense. Next up is Akheem Mesidor. And this is another guy who's dropped on some boards, but for completely different reasons. Mesidor fell from 19th to 28th on one big board, and the concern here is medical, specifically his foot. He played through a right foot injury during the 2022 season, tried to gut it out again in 2023, but eventually had to shut it down and get surgery. Then there were reports that he also had a similar issue with his left foot, where he tore some ligaments, and he even missed a game in 2025 with another foot/ankle injury. When you see that kind of pattern with lower body injuries, especially in the same area, you have to wonder about long-term durability and whether this guy can hold up over a full NFL season and a long career. One report indicated that the Cowboys view Mesidor as a legitimate option at 12, which tells you that Dallas has done their homework on the medical side, and they feel comfortable enough with what they found to consider him as a top-tier prospect. That's huge because if some teams are scared off by the injury history, Mesidor could slide right into Dallas's lap and give them an instant impact edge rusher who can help right away. And the crazy part is, if Mesidor didn't have the foot concerns, and if he was 23 years old instead of 25, we'd probably be debating whether he'd even make it to pick 12 because his tape is that good. But because he's older, and because there are medical red flags, he's become a polarizing prospect where some teams won't touch him and other teams see value. For a team like Dallas that's in win-now mode and needs immediate production, drafting a 25-year-old rookie actually makes more sense than it would for a rebuilding team that's trying to align timelines with a young core. The Cowboys don't have the luxury of waiting 2 or 3 years for a prospect to develop. They need guys who can step in and contribute in 2025, and Mesidor fits that profile perfectly. If the medical checks out and Dallas feels confident he can stay healthy, Mesidor at 12 could be a home run because you're getting a pro-ready edge rusher who knows how to get after the quarterback and set the edge in the run game. And that's exactly what this defense has been missing for years. But here's the risk. If you draft Mesidor at 12 and he can't stay healthy, you've just burned a top pick on a guy who's either on the sideline or playing at less than full strength, and that sets your defense back another year when you're already trying to recover from last season's disaster. The other factor here is age, because even if Mesidor stays completely healthy, you're getting fewer prime years out of him compared to a younger prospect, so the window to maximize his value is shorter. League insiders have suggested that some teams are completely off Mesidor because of the medical and the age, but if Dallas has done their due diligence and they believe he's worth the risk, then I trust their evaluation more than some generic concern about his birthday. The foot injuries are obviously the elephant in the room and you can't just ignore them, but if multiple doctors have cleared him and the Cowboys medical staff is confident, then I'm all in on Mesidor at 12 because the talent is undeniable and the need is desperate. Would you roll the dice on a 25-year-old with injury history if it meant getting a guy who can produce double-digit sacks in year one? That's the gamble Dallas might be facing, and it's not an easy call, but sometimes you have to take risks if you want to build a defense that can actually stop somebody in January. Now let's talk about Peter Woods because this is one of the most confusing prospects in the entire draft, and opinions on him are all over the place. Woods was a potential top 5 to top 10 pick heading into his final season at Clemson, but his production absolutely fell off a cliff in 2025, and now teams are trying to figure out what happened and whether he's still worth a first-round investment. His tackles for loss dropped from 8.5 to 3.5. His pressure rate went from 11.4% in 2023 to 9% in 2024 to just 3.9% this past season, and he had multiple games where he didn't generate a single pressure after going all of 2024 without a single game like that. Some evaluators have pointed to effort concerns and said that Woods looked like he was going through the motions late in the season, which is a massive red flag, because effort is something that should never disappear no matter how bad your team is. Clemson had a brutal year as a program, and it's fair to ask how much of Woods' decline was due to bad coaching, scheme fit, or lack of talent around him versus how much of it was on him personally. But at the end of the day, the tape is the tape, and the production isn't there. The Cowboys' defensive line coach was at Clemson's Pro Day, which tells you Dallas is at least doing their homework on Woods, and that makes sense because the defensive tackle class is weak this year, and if you believe Woods can get back to his 2024 form, he could be a value pick in the middle of the first round. But here's the problem. What if 2025 wasn't a fluke? And what if Woods just isn't that good when he's not surrounded by elite talent and a dominant scheme? Clemson moved him around a bit and tried him at 3 Tech, which some people thought would unlock his potential, but he was somehow even worse in that role, and it raises questions about whether he's a scheme-specific player who needs everything to be perfect around him or if he just didn't care once the season went sideways. The flashes are absolutely there on tape, and when Woods is locked in, he looks like a future Pro Bowler, but the consistency vanished this year, and consistency is what separates good players from great ones at the next level. If Dallas drafts Woods, they're betting that they can coach him up and reignite whatever made him special in 2024, and maybe they can. But it's a big ask when you're using a premium pick on a guy who looked disinterested for half a season. The defensive tackle position is a need for the Cowboys, and the options in this draft are limited. So Woods might end up being the best available player at the position even with all the concerns, and that's a tough spot to be in as a front office. Do you reach for a guy with effort questions because the alternative is reaching even further for someone with less talent? I don't know the answer, and I don't think anyone does right now. But the Cowboys are clearly intrigued enough to send a coach to his workout, and that means he's in play at some point. Personally, I'd be nervous about Woods because effort and motor are things that rarely improve at the next level, and if he's already checking out in college when things get hard, what's he going to do in the NFL when he's on a bad team or going through a losing streak? That's the question Dallas has to answer before they put his name on the card. Let's move on to C.J. Allen, who might be the most interesting case study of this entire group because his strengths and weaknesses are so clearly defined. Allen's instincts are off the charts, and he was literally calling the defensive plays for Georgia last season. Not just relaying them, but actually diagnosing offenses and telling his teammates where to line up. And that's the kind of football IQ you can't teach. His brain works at a different speed than most players, and he processes information in real time and adjusts on the fly, which is exactly what you want in a linebacker who's going to be the quarterback of your defense. The problem is everything else, and I mean that sincerely because the athletic ability is questionable, the medical history is concerning, and the coverage skills are inconsistent. Allen had meniscus surgery, and then came back and played just 13 days later, which is absolutely insane and shows incredible toughness, but he wasn't the same player after he returned, and that raises questions about whether the knee is fully healthy or if it's something that's going to linger throughout his career. He didn't do any drills or testing at his pro day and cited knee soreness, which is obviously related to the meniscus repair, and when a guy can't even run a 40 or do position drills a few months after surgery, you have to worry about what that means for his long-term durability. One recent update dropped Allen 14 spots on a big board from 32 to 46, and that kind of fall tells you the medical concerns are real and teams are backing off because they don't want to invest a high pick in someone who might not hold up physically. But here's the thing. If the knee checks out and Allen can prove he's healthy, you're getting a linebacker with elite instincts, solid run support, and the ability to be a leader in the locker room and on the field, and that's incredibly valuable, even if he's not a freak athlete. His coverage ability is fine against running backs and tight ends in short areas, but he's not going to be a guy you can ask to run down the field with a slot receiver, so you need to understand what he is and what he isn't before you draft him. Allen had 3.5 sacks this past season, which shows he can blitz effectively when you send him, and his instincts in run support are among the best in this class. So if you're looking for a downhill linebacker who can thump people and never be out of position, he's your guy. The Cowboys need linebackers desperately because they only have 3 guys under contract, and they realistically need 4 to get through a season. So adding Allen at some point on day 2 could make a lot of sense if the medical clears and they feel good about his ability to stay on the field. The question for Dallas is whether they value instincts and leadership over athleticism and upside, and that's a philosophical debate that every front office has to have during draft season. I love what Allen brings mentally, and I think his football IQ would make everyone around him better, but I can't ignore the knee issues and the athletic limitations. So if I'm the Cowboys, I'm doing every possible test and exam to make sure he's healthy before I even think about drafting him. Is a high IQ linebacker with medical concerns worth a third-round pick if you believe he can be a starter for 5 years? Comment below because I genuinely think Cowboys fans are going to be split on this one, and there's no right answer until we see how it plays out. Now we need to address the bigger picture here, which is that the Cowboys absolutely have to add linebackers in this draft because the depth chart is a disaster right now. Dallas has 3 linebackers under contract, and they need at least 4, maybe 5, if you count special teams and rotational guys. So this is a position that has to be addressed either in the first 3 rounds or through multiple mid-round picks. The top linebacker in this class, according to most boards, is Sonny Styles, who's a top 5 overall talent, but he's not making it to 12, so Dallas can forget about him unless they trade up, which seems unlikely. After Styles, the next tier includes guys like Jacob Rodriguez at 40 overall, TJ Allen at 46, Jalen Gold at 48, and Anthony Hill at 50, and those guys are all bunched together in terms of value and evaluation. Some analysts have them in different orders, but the consensus is that this group represents the second tier of linebackers, and they're all realistic targets for Dallas at pick 20, or in the second round if they trade back and add extra picks. Beyond that top group, you're looking at guys like Josiah Trotter and Kyle Lewis, who couldn't be more different as players. Trotter is an old-school thumper who runs downhill and destroys ball carriers, but can't cover anybody in space, while Lewis is undersized but plays like a safety and can match up with tight ends and running backs in man coverage. Lewis showed at the Senior Bowl that he's got legit coverage upside and he could even play as a hybrid nickel safety linebacker, but you have to have a specific role in mind for him because he's not an every down player if you're asking him to take on blocks and stop the run. Trotter is the opposite. He's a 2-down banger who's going to blow up running plays and chase ball carriers from sideline to sideline, but if you leave him out there on 3rd down, he's a liability because he can't move well enough in space to cover anyone. The Cowboys need to decide what kind of linebacker they want, because the scheme and the role dictate which player makes sense, and if they're trying to build a faster, more versatile defense, then Lewis is the move, but if they want to stop the run and get more physical up front, then Trotter fits better. One name that's fascinating and nobody's really talking about is Harold Perkins Jr., who is one of the hardest guys in this draft to evaluate because he's played edge rusher, off-ball linebacker, and even some nickel corner, and nobody really knows what his best position is at the next level. Perkins is only 220 pounds, so he's way too light to play edge full-time in the NFL, but he's got pass rush skills and can get after the quarterback when you send him on blitzes. His coverage is inconsistent, and he's much better going downhill and chasing plays in pursuit than he is dropping back and playing zone or matching up in man. So he's kind of a tweener who needs a creative defensive coordinator to unlock his potential. He's great against running backs coming out of the backfield, and he's got the speed to chase plays from behind, but asking him to play 3 downs and do everything is probably unrealistic, and most teams don't have a clear plan for how to use him. Perkins is a 5th to 6th round guy according to some evaluators, but if Dallas thinks they can scheme around his limitations and maximize his strengths, he could be a sneaky value pick on day 3 who ends up being a core special teamer and situational pass rusher. The problem is too many coaches fall in love with tools and versatility and then don't actually have a plan, and Perkins is the exact kind of player who ends up bouncing around the league because nobody knows how to use him correctly. So where does all this leave the Cowboys heading into draft night? They've got needs at corner, edge rusher, defensive tackle, and linebacker, and all 4 of those positions are represented in the guys we just talked about, so Dallas has options depending on how the board falls. If Mesidor is there at 12 and the medical checks out, I think you have to seriously consider him because edge rusher is the most important position on defense other than corner, and he can produce right away. If Mesidor is gone and you're looking at Terrell or another corner, you have to weigh the speed concerns against the immediate need and decide if you're comfortable with a guy who might be limited to slot work. Peter Woods is a wild card because the talent is there, but the effort and consistency questions are real, and if you're drafting him, you're betting on your coaching staff to fix whatever went wrong at Clemson, and that's a gamble that doesn't always pay off. The linebacker situation is the most urgent because Dallas is legitimately thin at the position and needs bodies. So even if they don't go linebacker early, they absolutely have to add multiple guys on day 2 and day 3 to fill out the roster and give themselves depth for injuries and rotations. Before we wrap this up, make sure you're subscribed to Blue and Silver Nation if you haven't already, because we're going to be covering every single pick the Cowboys make in real time with instant analysis and breakdowns, and you don't want to miss any of it. All right, here's my final take on all of this. The Cowboys are in a tough spot because they have so many needs and not enough premium picks to fill all of them. So they're going to have to nail their evaluations and trust their process when it comes to medical concerns, effort questions, and scheme fit. Mesidor is the highest upside guy if he's healthy. Terrell is the safest pick if you believe he can play the slot. Woods is the biggest risk reward. And Allen is the smartest player who might not have the body to hold up long term. The linebacker class is deep enough that Dallas should be able to find contributors on day 2 and 3. But they can't afford to whiff on their early picks because this defense needs talent immediately, and there's no time to develop projects. I think the Cowboys go edge rusher or corner at 12 depending on who's available, grab a linebacker at 20 or in the second round, and then attack defensive tackle and depth linebacker on day 3 with multiple picks. What do you think Dallas should do at 12 and 20? Would you take Mesidor if he's there or play it safe with someone else? Drop your take in the comments because I want to know how Cowboys Nation feels about all these guys and whether you trust the front office to get this right. This draft is absolutely critical for Dallas to turn the defense around and get back to being a contender, so let's hope they nail it and give us something to be excited about. Blue and Silver Nation, let's ride.